When I proposed this presentation last year, I intended to discuss the problems of taking student-produced videos in our writing classes as seriously as the words in a row writing we all know so well. For while I think most contemporary writing teachers think that including multimedia in writing classes at a variety of levels is a good idea, and I think it's a good idea too, multimedia projects tend to be secondary to the quote-unquote real writing. They are usually jokes, and they are very frequently not very good, thus the alliteration-heavy amateur auteur. But a couple of things happened shortly after I had my proposal accepted. First, it occurred to me that what I was intending to present was impossible, or at least unethical. How do I stand up here and show a bunch of student work, pointing out how bad and ridiculous it is in different ways? Not something that would get approved by my institution's IRB process, I would hope. Second, I had my own experiences last year trying to publish a scholarly video project that I thought would be more interesting to talk about, and in a way it's at least as fitting. Like our students, I think the great majority of us in composition studies are amateur auteurs at best when it comes to video projects, and as the case with our teaching, we're still trying to figure out how this stuff is going to work in our scholarship. So, a slightly new title and focus, Amateur Auteurs, the challenge of producing and publishing multimedia scholarship in writing studies. I do still think this reflects on teaching too. In brief, I'm arguing that despite the theoretical arguments about multimedia, that it too is writing, and despite the increased desire to see multimedia as part of scholarship in writing, and by multimedia, I mean generally writing that incorporates image, sound, interaction, moving pictures, and so forth, though for the purposes of my presentation I really mean video. Despite the quest for work in digital humanities, and despite the new journals and projects publishing multimedia scholarship, despite all this, I don't think we're there yet. I doubt we'll really ever get there, and I'm beginning to wonder if we should get there. In contrast to our abilities as writing professionals, we are all multimedia amateurs, dabblers, and improvisers, borrowing from a few websites for advice and throwing our work against walls to see if it will stick. And because we're first and foremost words in a row writers, maybe that's the way it should be. The movie I made with 3 graduate student collaborators was called Video in Review, Teaching, Learning, Writing Through Multimedia Performance in an Online Graduate Seminar. And we made it in response to the call for the first issue of the C's Online, which is a special issue on performance and writing. The movie was about an assignment I gave in a graduate level class at EMU where I asked students to make 10-minute or so videos where they review a book relevant to the class. My idea is that this both introduces students to independently reading and reviewing scholarly material, and it forces them to learn the basics of making a simple video with iMovie or Movie Maker and then uploading it to YouTube. To make our documentary, my graduate student collaborators joined me in interview discussions where we talked about their videos that they made for class individually then collectively. In effect, it was an attempt at a documentary-style performance about performance. The whole thing is about 20 minutes long, and it's still available to the curious at this website. But just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about here, let me show a clip that samples some different aspects of the movie. I think it is actually a more unified story in the whole than the choppiness of this clip might suggest, but I wanted to share some footage that gives you a sense of the whole piece. It starts out with some parts of the student videos, the clip that it starts out with some parts of the student videos where we're talking about conversations about their performance. There's an example there of many sections that appear in the video where one student's reflecting on her process. There's a group discussion of all of us at a brew pub. And I finished with another kind of segment that ran throughout the whole video, another example of a dialogue between myself and my student collaborators.
And text and video on the internet, and his colleague essentially describes it as MySpace meets YouTube meets Wikipedia meets Google on steroids. So after a few minutes,
being that this was the first time that I used any kind of movie maker software or anything like that, I understood the general concept of having a track for video, having a track for audio, and trying to match them up. But the challenge I ran into was the fact
in 2007. The book is part of a series edited by Gail Harwasher and Cynthia Self called New Dimensions in Computers and Composition that is
like I was having kind of a freak out moment on Thursday or Friday, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to start doing a project like this. I have no idea where I've read the book. I know what it says. I know what I think about the book. I can free write about that, but I have no idea what I'm supposed to do in terms, like I could write a paper right now.
Look, the rhetoric of cool with this gripping quote, and what he does throughout the book is similar to the dissection process he describes here. Rice slices into the history of rhetoric and exposes what he thinks are some of the critical missing organs.
Yeah, so you'll see that I'm videotaping from my hotel room at I had my text, and I went through and I highlighted the words that I thought would be interesting to have images
Like
with.
literally.
Like with my computer.
You had a great persona because you were wearing your like zebra kind of dress. Remember you had that? I remember you had a necklace that was like pretty bright and out there. You were like a cool music. No polyester here.
Yeah. You were like the news anchor.
I was from PBS.
Yeah, like
the
voiceover
educational.
Right. And I don't know who I was. I guess I was somewhere in the middle.
You were the guy in the dark room.
I was the guy in the dark room. I was the guy in the prison cell posting something.
Students come out of my first year composition class and they are able to make really good videos, or having problems with just basic sentence level sort of grammar issues. You know, I don't think that I've necessarily done that student a lot of good.
You know, you could say that about just about anything when you want to bring something new in.
It's true.
And you know, realistically, I think it's about, you know, what are we really valuing here?
Our goal was to make a movie that stood in and of itself. That is, a movie that was not intended to be a part of a submission, but rather we made just the C's online, but rather it was the whole thing. Now, my collaborators and I ultimately withdrew our submission to the C's Online because of concerns we had about the logistics of hosting the project and Creative Commons licensing, some issues that are not at all the fault of Bump Halliburton, Jen Fishman, and the fine folks who have had their work featured in this rebirth of the C's Online. These problems make visible what I see as NCTE's, and again, not Bump and not Jen, but NCTE's, less than charitable view on open source publishing practices, and less than enlightened ideas about how to sustain internet-based publications. But these issues are my topics for today. The anonymous reviewers for the Season Online were split on our piece, one saying revise and resubmit, another saying reject. After our Season Online experience, I submitted the movie as it is to another online journal for their consideration, and they too declined publishing. So the process with this project, along with those my students who make videos and such, has prompted me to start rethinking and reconsidering some of the dilemmas and limitations of multimedia work as scholarship in composition and rhetoric. For example, one of the criticisms I received for our video was there's too much talking heads. This is true, but this is in line with the genre of the documentary, and besides, the subject matter of our field, writing and rhetoric, does not exactly lend itself to a lot of action sequences. Another problem we bumped up against was the call for some sort of a textual framing for the piece. In other words, one of the revision suggestions was we need some words to explain our movie, even though our intention from the beginning was to do exactly the opposite of that, make a movie that could stand on its own as a movie. But the more I thought about it, the more problems I saw with our intentions. For starters, just about all the video work and writing studies I know well is actually a lot of words. For example, think of Dan Anderson and his colleagues' work in the new C's Online, This Is What We Did in Our Class. It's interesting and smart stuff for sure that it's presented as video and audio. This is just the video portion of it. But what is videoed here is in fact mostly words. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Walter Ong probably had it right all along when he argued that one of the powers of literacy is its ability to make scholarship itself possible. Disciplines like music, dance, and film produce their scholarly texts with words in a row. Why would scholarship about writing be any different from that? If I turn this talk into a full-blown essay, I'll definitely want to go more deeply into those issues. But for the rest of my talk, I want to return to the idea of the amateur auteur and how our amateur filmmaking fits with our professionalism with words in a row writing. The reason this is worth talking about at all is that anyone can make a movie nowadays, as evident but with our students' productions, our own productions, is evident with mostly YouTube. However, and this is also evident with our students' productions and with YouTube, not to mention my own movie, this does not mean we are automatically capable of making movies that actually look like movies. That is, real and honest-to-goodness professional corporate movies with quote-unquote production values, quality images, sound, pacing, and effects that distinguish the amateur from the professional. Or is it the other way around? The dichotomy between professional and amateur is at the heart of the problem Alexandra Huaz has with YouTube, as she has written about it in a number of contexts, including the video book Learning from YouTube. Juhas is a professional filmmaker and professor of media studies at Pitzer College, who gained national attention for teaching a class about YouTube within the confines of YouTube a few years back. In brief, she argues that there are two kinds of video on YouTube. First, there is bad video, which is made by amateurs about mundane life events. Bad video is unedited and reliant on word or spectacle, and they accrue value through the suffering, talent, or humor of the individual. In contrast, she argues there's corporate video, which is made by professionals in the name of making money. Quote, these videos express ideas about the products of dominant culture in the music-driven, quickly edited, glossy, slogan-like vernacular of music videos, commercials, and comics. They consolidate ideas into icons, meaning is lost to feeling. For Juhas, these two kinds of videos play off each other, and they make YouTube into a kind of cultural, hegemonic, rarefying machine. She argues YouTube could be a radical development in media history because the video production of real people holds down half the medium's vernacular. However, by refining the distinction between the amateur and the professional, the personal and the social, in both form and content, YouTube maintains, not democratizes, operating distinctions about who owns culture seriously. YouTube is thought of as a joke, a place for jokes, a place for regular people whose role and interest must also be a joke. Now, I have several problems with Juhas's argument. For starters, it has a curious form of elitism that is sometimes the unintended byproduct of leftist progressive critiques. Second, her distinction of the amateur and the professional starts to collapse pretty rapidly when we consider the number of movies that have been professionally made in recent years with the intent of looking amateurish, and the number of amateur productions on YouTube and elsewhere that have become professional and have made a lot of money. The hilarious and infamous David After Dentist has reportedly earned David's father and family around $100,000 in ad revenue from YouTube, and who knows how much from his web-based store. But even though she fails, in my view, to make a clear distinction between the amateur/bad and professional/corporate video, I see her point, and I think it is analogous to the problem our field has with defining what it wants in its multimedia scholarship. In the case of my video, both reviewers for the Seas Online issue both reviews for the Seas Online issue got the general point of our performance about performance and thought we made a good and fitting argument for the issue. One reviewer said do not publish and the other said revise and resubmit, and both suggested revisions that range from easy, such as changing the speed of text rolling by, to impossible, such as reshooting scenes for the movie. And both flagged as problematic bad production quality, such as the scene where we're all sitting around talking at the local brew pub. But I think this calls for better professional quality. This call for better professional quality video is problematic in a number of ways. First, while revise and resubmit is a reasonable enough request on authors when that means fleshing out an idea with a bit more research, adding a paragraph here and taking one away there, that isn't easy with video in general and not possible with live interview footage. You can't go back in time. Second, and probably more important, none of the venues publishing video work as scholarship have any meaningful guidelines of production standards for producing video in the first place. The Seas Online online submission guidelines only say audiovisual web texts do not have typical word counts or page lengths, and then they go on to give great detail about words in a row web text submissions. Enculturation, for example, offers instructions on how to submit Word files or quote-unquote media, but that's it. Kairos describes what we're looking for and what we're not looking for, and they do offer some pretty useful examples, but ultimately their examples too break down to good stuff versus bad stuff, which is not particularly useful guidance for planning and composing a video in the first place. Now, I'm not going to argue that the movie my collaborators and I made should have been warmly received and published as it was delivered. I honestly don't know if it's any good myself, which is the first mark of the amateur versus the professional. As an academic and professional writer, I know when I think a piece of words in a row writing is good or not. And based on professional expertise and reputation, I'm willing and able to make a claim. I have experience, knowledge, and ethos. As a video making amateur, I have none of these things. I enthusiastically dabble, and I admire or scorn specific elements of my results, but I very specifically do not know what I'm doing, and I do not have the right to take my work here too seriously. So along with the problems of multimedia scholarship that I mentioned earlier, that is, the subject matter itself of writing does not really lend itself to video representation, and the necessity of words have to take priority over audio-video representation in order for scholarship to take place in the first place. Besides those two issues, I think this professional/amateur dichotomy presents a challenge to those of us who want to take multimedia work and writing studies seriously. On the one hand, it would make sense for journals interested in publishing multimedia work to lay out clear and professional guidelines for audio and video submissions. On the other hand, if the guidelines were more specific and professionally demanding, that is, asking for multi-camera shoots with video only, shot with high-definition equipment, appropriate lighting, clean sound, etc., then there would certainly be a lot fewer multimedia submissions. And again, along with all of this, I think we need to be serious and realistic about the role of video, audio, and the like in relation to our more traditional sense of writing. I didn't think this was the case when I started my project, but it seems very clear to me now that our scholarly work in writing can be supplemented and enhanced by images and sounds, but these things cannot replace our words in rows. I don't have an easy answer to this. I don't have an easy balance of how many words in a row do we need to accompany our audio files and our video files and vice versa. But I'm interested in thinking and talking more about it. And in the meantime, when it comes to my own work and my students' work, making videos and making audio files, I think I will do my best to celebrate and enjoy my amateur standing.